Coming up on Bridges today, you'll get to meet Mickey Robinson, who had a near-death experience, a journey into heaven, and just God's miraculous intervention in his life. And then you'll meet Annie Downs, where we will learn to face our fears and all be brave together.
Stay tuned. Bridges starts now.
Welcome to Bridges. I'm Monica Schmelter. Glad you could join us. Mickey Robinson joins me right now, and his book is Falling into Heaven. I want to welcome you, Mickey.
Hello, how are you, Monica?
It's good to have you today.
It's good to be here.
Now, I've read, the book, and I've met you before and heard a little bit about your story and your near-death experience skydiving. Let's hear a little bit about your life leading up to the accident and just really how God has intervened.
Well, I was born in the suburbs around Cleveland, Ohio, and raised there in what would be called, I'd be one of those in the number, was called post-World War II baby boomer. I think people are real nervous during the war. Afterwards, they're a little calm and boom. There was lots of babies, and I was one of them. So I grew up in that time of kind of a golden era of America. There wasn't war, there wasn't economic crisis, there wasn't political oppression. It was really a golden time in America. Made in USA means it was all good. We had the best stuff, and it was kind of a idyllic time. The good guys were the good guys, the bad guys were the bad guys.
It was easy to tell.
It was easy to tell, and my childhood heroes would be Superman. He'd catch the bad guys and turn them in and then disguise himself back as Clark Kent, a middle-class American person that was trying to blend in. And as I was a child, my mom was the first of 9 children born here from an Italian family, and she was very much an Italian Catholic. So from the time I'm a baby, I was raised up in the church, went to 8 years of Catholic school, and that's what I knew. And then when in public high school, I was gravitating towards a certain type of crowd. I was an athlete, and so it was that kind of group. And in that time in our culture, I was the first maybe television generation, and it was about looking good, being you just didn't play a game, you played to win, and it was really better values. I mean, even in a secular way, but there was a rapidly changing, emerging thing going on in our culture, and I was trying to adapt to it. On the outside, I lived in a pristine kind of a neighborhood, but inside we had what talk show hosts would now call a dysfunctional family. My dad drank too much, worked hard, and there was domestic, not tranquility. And so I was looking outside of that for other images and my talents and whatever I gravitated to. I wanted to have nice clothes. I wanted to have exciting stuff. And so, I was a championship football player. I was on a swim team. I was a gymnast. We didn't have much of a mountain, but we went snow skiing. I went snow skiing. And it was always extreme excitement, Yeah,
like a lot of adventure in your life.
That's how I liked it. But, it also is a promise that if you look and act a certain way, you'll be rewarded. And so I didn't know anything like that. Like I said, I went to church all my life. I never met one person, however, who told me there was a real God. They had answered prayer. To me, God was way out there. I'm busy on here, being a teenager and a young man, and then I graduated from high school at the age of 18. When I turned 18, I got this pretty prestigious job without going to university. I talked my way into it in a stock brokerage firm in Cleveland, Ohio. And it wasn't about being greedy of the money. It was about the action and the image, and I was good at it. And in a couple of months, they promoted me, and I'm handling millions of dollars of other people's money every day. So it was actually pretty good for my ego.
You had a good life, sounds like.
I had a good life. What people said is a good life. I think on the outward, it looked like here's a guy. It seemed like he's got his act together. But inside, I had a father wound. I was unloved. A lot of the stuff I would talk about was either exaggeration or it wasn't really true at all. And it was trying to be something that everybody would accept. And then I had, the right girl and the right plan and everything else. But there's never enough in this life to really satisfy. If it's sensation, if it's money, if it's fame, it's just never enough to really fill it up. It actually just stimulates a greater hunger and a lack of real fulfillment. I didn't know that. I was just,
Well, you're still a kid.
Well, the problem with being a kid that age, you think you're smarter than everybody else when you're an adult. And I started flying. I was always fascinated with aviation, flying, from when I was just a little guy. And airplanes, Superman, astronauts, you name it. And I started flying airplanes And then I found out it was a lot more fun to jump out of them. And I became a skydiving crackhead. I mean, I came into one jump and I was addicted. And only after 20 jumps, I was asked to be on a professional demonstration team.
Wow.
And that doesn't happen. And so my life, I was just, I thought I was really in control, and I was living literally for the moment. A lot of people live for the moment in other ways, but for me it was literally that time in free fall, which people think, well, you must be an adrenaline junkie. Well, I wasn't afraid, so it wasn't adrenaline, it was the pleasure. I think more than anything else, people gravitate towards what is pleasing to them, and we can say even pleasure. There's all kinds of things, but this was really the ultimate for me, and I was really good at it. But I didn't know that all of that kind of life could be over that fast, and it would never be the same forever. What was to be a very ordinary routine practice jump in which we were going to actually train and release 2 students at lower altitudes, and 3 of us were going to go to a very high altitude, 13,500 feet, and do aerial maneuvers called relative work, and then open our parachutes and land. Just normal. Well, shortly after takeoff, there was something suddenly that woke. I was dozing off because I was kind of annoyed at the length of time it took to. I just wanted to go to the top floor and get out.
Yeah.
And you know, the free fall was what we were living for. And I was awakened by the sound of silence. The engine quit right after takeoff. We lost all of our lift, the aerodynamic property that holds the plane up. We plunged straight down at a horrific speed and hammered right into a very large tree. We had taken all the seats out except the pilot, so I was flung forward and my face stopped my body going 100 miles an hour. Horrible impact. We cartwheeled a few times, and you can see the wreckage of the airplane. It was a horrific crash. There was injury amongst the students, and one of the professional skydivers was helping them escape. And my partner, who was right by the baggage door removed, he just got out and was running away, and then the plane exploded, and he heard screaming and realized that I was trapped inside, as well as the pilot. So he rushed inside this death trap with this superhuman bravery and strength, and extracted me, pulled me loose. I was trying to escape through this hole that was created in the side of the plane, and I was soaked with gasoline and burning alive, on fire from head to toe. And with a lot of, you know, hysterical energy, he put the fire out. And I remember, it was kind of fuzzy, but I remember the ambulance racing and looking at the ceiling of the ambulance, and you know, and you're hurt that bad, and you're going into shock. I didn't know how bad I was hurt,
of course,
but I knew I was in. For the first time in my life, a self-sufficient person knew I was in deeper trouble, and I could talk my way in.
Exactly.
I couldn't flash my charisma or get my. And I said, for the first time in my life, I cried out to a God that I didn't know and never served, and didn't think of the time of day. God, help me. I'm sorry. Please help me, give me another chance. And then he got me to the hospital, just the closest little hospital, the emergency room, and let my mom see me for a moment, and then I was in for surgery and whatever. Yeah. The doctors didn't think I'd make it through the night. I had massive 3rd-degree burns, you know, head injury, blind in my right eye, and you know, just tremendous impact and catastrophic injuries. And they thought, even though I was a professional athlete, probably going to die of shock.
Yeah, well, because it was just so traumatic. You went through so much, and you outlined this in your book, Falling into Heaven, and you talk about you cried out to a God that you hadn't served. I mean, because you kind of were at your first experience in your life that was bigger than you, or bigger than what you thought that you could handle.
Yeah.
And part of what I love about the book, Falling into Heaven, Mickey, is that you talk about the miraculous and God intervening. And we've only got a couple of minutes left, but maybe you could outline some of that about how God met you. Because lots of us, whether we're in a skydiving accident or not, we have those experiences that we're just like, okay, God, if you're real, I need to know now.
Okay. The injuries were catastrophic, and then the complications became worse. And I developed all the things they heroically tried to prevent. I got massive infection, huge weight loss. I went from 170-some pounds, professional athlete, down to 90 pounds, bleeding 10 pints of blood a day. The nerves in both legs went dead, and they found, you know, they thought I wasn't going to live, and then they knew I was going to die. Yeah. And they brought a specialist in, and they gave up trying to save my life. And at a point when there was absolutely no hope, and I was in so much pain, and there was just no chance, I had this experience that I never heard of before. My spirit went perpendicular to my body. See, you know, we are a spirit, we have a soul, and we live in this body, which is the environment of Earth. And my spirit stood up, and I was ejected, and I went into a spiritual dimension. I was shocked. There was multiple things I became aware of by revelation. This is the real me, this spirit person. Of course, there was nothing wrong with what I was seeing.
Yeah.
And the shapes, everything, the colors are just stunning. But the biggest thing was the comprehension of eternity. This spirit is going to be everlasting. And I couldn't change anything. And I was traveling like on a plane or gliding. I didn't, nothing was pulling me. And I was going towards this perfect white light. And it was compelling, and it had a peace emanating from it. I wanted to go there. Then I felt a pressure, like from my right side. And I looked into it. It was an abyss of blackness that was eternal, non-negotiable, permanent solitary confinement. And it was closing. And again, I cried out. Now, I had done numerous times, said the same similar thing. God, I'm sorry, please help me. I want another chance. Now it's not just in the hospital and being sick and in pain. It's I'm on the edge of eternity, about to be sealed forever.
And you knew that.
You know that it's beyond knowing. It's pure revelation. You know that you know that you know. And it's terrifying. And I was almost to this white light. And I just said, and I know that if I would be sealed, it's forever. And I said, God, I'm sorry. I want to live. I want to be alive. And I was thrust through this white portal, and I was standing in the third heaven in the presence of Almighty God. And in his presence is the fullness of joy.
Amen.
And from his right hand are pleasures that are indescribable, simultaneous things happening. I was never going to die. I knew that. This incredible love, this love of God was being radiated into me. And it's the most unbelievable pure love there is. It's in a dimension of love that we can't even compare anything to. And everything in heaven that I was seeing is alive, and it all glorifies God. There is no darkness, there's no shadows. Everything, light goes into everything, comes out of everything. And there's a lot more details in the book. Then I saw an open vision that showed people that I didn't know, and I felt I was relating to them, circumstances. About 6.5 years. I saw my wife 5 years before we met. I saw a scene that was very pleasant, where I was by a rusty gate, and there was lilac bushes that I could smell. I could feel the warmth of the sun. I turned, and I saw this person, and it was my future wife, at a place where we were going to raise horses and then have babies. It was very pleasant. That happened 6 years later. And then I saw a scene in the Caribbean where I said something, and when I spoke that, the vision dissolved, and I was in the presence of God, and God was sending me back. Oh, and it was remorseful to come back.
I can imagine.
It's like anybody that says they went to heaven, they want to go back to check their mail or feed their cat, they weren't in heaven. They were in another place listening to an imposter. Yes. But when God speaks, that happens. And a person who had no hope, who was hopeless, came back. My spirit sank into my dead body. I woke up full of life, full of the love of God. The river of life I was standing in was inside of me. And when I was the most uncomfortable you could be, God comforted me. And around the bed were these doctors and nurses who were petrified with fear. I felt bad for them, because now I had something that's beyond good. I can say that. This was peace that passes understanding. I was technically, in every way, and even in 2014 medicine, I was hopeless. And in every way, I lost everything. I lost all my talents, those looks at that time, charisma, any destiny. But I was so full of confidence in life when there was nothing changed. And the amazing thing is, before there was any change, God comforted me. So there's a real important thing for people in the audience. As long as you're conscious, there's always hope.
Amen.
You can find hope in God. Now, I called it to God a generic, I was raised, I heard the stories about Jesus, but I didn't know who he was. I never met a person to tell me that Jesus is alive and he's the same. But very soon, I began to have such spiritual experiences, and I went on a quest to find out. It's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's Messiah, the promised one to the Jews first and then to the Greeks. It's everything the Bible talks about focuses on the person and the power and the love of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father and the power of the Holy Spirit. And there were so many miracles. I was blind for 5.5 years, and now I can see.
Amen.
Both legs were the nerves were dead. They said never walk again.
And you walk.
I walk, I snow ski. I'm going to play football on Thanksgiving. But the biggest thing was this supernatural love.
Yes.
And the hope and you don't have to go through a crash. You don't have to have a bad relationship. And you can't put it off. And I think some people, Monica, have a near life experience. They were born into a culture, and maybe they go to church, or maybe they're trying to live a good life and try and be a good citizen. None of us are good enough to be in the Lord. There is more, and that more is all found in Jesus.
Amen.
You really need to have Jesus now, and eternal life starts. It doesn't start when you breathe your last. It starts by knowing the Father.
Amen.
And Jesus who he sent.
Amen.
And that's available right now.
That's right, to everybody. I want to thank you for coming and for sharing. The rest of his story is outlined in this book called Falling into Heaven. We'll be right back in just a moment.
If you would like to purchase a copy of today's show for $15, you can send a check to the address on your screen or call us at 615-754-0039. Be sure to mention the program number on the screen.
The work of Christ in our lives is not just a surface work. It goes deep down into the core of who we are. And the joy that Christ wants to produce in our lives is a joy that is of substance.
To schedule Monica to speak at your next event, contact her at monicaspeaks.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/MonicaSpeaksTV today.
The idea of Let's All Be Brave is that if each of us will realize how unique we are and realize that God made us each differently, then we can look for that unique call to courage. I think I grew up thinking that the bravest Christians were the missionaries, the ones who are willing to live in a hut in Africa, and those people are really brave. But I don't like to be hot. And so I never felt like that was gonna be my life. And so I felt like a second-class Christian, but the older I've gotten, the more I've begun to see that what God has for me is very different than that, but I have the opportunity to be just as brave. And so if I will step into that, then that will affect the people around me. As they're stepping into their thing, that affects me.
If you're just joining us right now on Bridges, Annie Downs is my guest, and we are going to talk about facing our fears and her book, Let's All Be Brave. I want to welcome you. It's nice to meet you today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, when I read about Let's All Be Brave, I think, oh boy, I need to be brave. Because Annie, I've sure had some fears grip my life, and I understand that this is just something you're working to kind of help us all come together on.
Right, and I think this is probably true for you, it's true for me, that there has never been a point where I stopped hearing the fear voices.
Exactly.
It's not that they go away.
No.
We think that brave people are the ones who don't hear the fear voices in their head.
Right.
When the truth is, I really think the brave ones are the people who go, I hear this fear telling me not to do this, or I hear this fear telling me not to go there or speak to that person. I'm gonna do it anyway.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like swimming through Jell-O, doesn't it? Like, I'm gonna do this, it's not easy. And we have to balance it with wisdom. If you hear in your head, like, don't jump out of the plane without a parachute. That's probably right.
Yeah,
right?
That's definitely right.
Be wise. But there's also these times that I think God opens doors for us to be brave and we go, okay, I'll do that as soon as I'm not scared anymore.
Yes.
And that's not when we get to be brave.
Exactly. And I think, Annie, I know one of the things that I thought certainly was that the older that I got, the less fear voices that I would hear. Like I thought certainly when a person turned 40,
Sure.
you would never hear any voices say, be afraid, don't do that. But I turned 40 and I found out you still hear it.
Right.
At 45, I still hear it.
Right.
At 50-something, I'm still hearing that. Or, that's gonna be awkward to say hello to them. So
Right.
how do we, Annie, give us some tips, how do we all be brave?
I think sometimes we, in our minds, think it was hard for me to sit at that new lunch table when I was 15, but it won't be when I'm 40.
Yeah.
And it still is.
Yeah,
When
it
we're
is.
at work and we see that one person who always has to sit by themselves, we still don't want to go over and sit with them,
You know
right?
that, yeah.
And so sometimes, I think a lot of times we look at courage as this big thing, like moving to another country or moving across the world or quitting our job and trying something crazy and new. And also, I think bravery is an everyday thing. So what does it look like to be brave? I think it looks like being kind to the postman when you've never been kind to him before.
Yes.
I think it can be paying for the person's Starbucks drink in line behind you. I think it can be saying out loud to someone, I've always wanted to write a book, or I've always wanted to go to the gym, but I don't want to go by myself. Will you go with me?
Yes.
I think courage is in our everyday. Something that happened to me, I grew up in the church, and bizarrely, I don't think my church ever taught this necessarily, but I just had this thought in my head and this understanding that the really brave people and the top Christians were the missionaries. That those were the ones who God loved the most. They had front row seats in heaven.
Yes.
They're the ones that are the bravest. And I never wanted to be hot. I never wanted to live where there wasn't internet. That's never been in my heart. I love colder weather, and I love email. And so I just thought, that isn't who I want to be. Right. So I'm never going to be as good a Christian as the people who will live in a hut in Africa. While that is very brave, my calls to courage are really different than that. And so a big thing we should do for ourselves is start going, okay, I don't need to be her, or I don't need to be him. I need to figure out who I am. And once we get a better grip on how God made us uniquely, then I think we can hear those unique calls to courage. For you, there's some sort of call to courage to be on television, right?
Right. That
took some courage from you that isn't in some other people. Right? And no one's going to look at you and go, well, she's not as brave as the person living in China. You're like, no, you're brave. It's different.
Yes.
I spoke at a college a couple weeks ago, and a girl walked up to me at the end of my talk, and she said, well, why does God call some people to extreme courage and he didn't call me to extreme courage? And I said, you're the only one labeling extreme.
That's right.
For me, moving from Atlanta to Nashville was extreme courage.
And it is.
And it was a 3.5-hour drive, right? And I cried the whole way for like the first 6 months that I drove back to Atlanta. There are college students who go from Atlanta to California, right? And I drove to Nashville. I can still go home to the dentist if I have to. But that was, for me, that was a lot of courage. And I think part of doing Brave Life is celebrating your uniqueness and celebrating that what God's asking you to do that's brave is very different than what he's going to ask other people.
Yeah, because I think sometimes that we think it's like an all cookie cutter thing.
Right.
You know, like even you mentioned with me being on TV, you know, people think, well, oh, Monica, you must never be nervous.
Right, right.
I am nervous. I've been doing it for 30 years. I am nervous.
Yeah.
You know, I think, well, will I say something stupid? Will my stomach growl? Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But I've learned to kind of talk myself through these things, that it's not the end of the world if I feel panicked.
Right.
Is that something you talk about in your book?
Yeah,
Is that good?
totally. Yeah, you're right.
Is that good? Okay.
You're being brave.
Okay.
We're on the same team.
All right.
Yes, for sure. I think that is a big part of recognizing that once you step into brave things, it doesn't mean that that's the last step.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like in The Wizard of Oz when she gets in the Emerald City and she's there, right? I mean, it's when we take steps to be brave, the Lord's going to keep calling us to the next thing. I think it doesn't end. I think we have the privilege of living lives, if we choose, of living lives that God repeatedly says, okay, here's the next thing. Okay, I've got the next thing for you. And he shows up for us in those places. You know, after I moved to Nashville in 2008, I had the opportunity to move to Edinburgh, Scotland in 2011. Yeah, it was awesome. I totally loved it. But it was way scarier to move to Nashville than to move to Scotland for me.
Really?
Yes. It was way scarier because when the opportunity came to move to Scotland, I thought, well, God showed up for me when I moved to Nashville. He'll do it again. Yes, it was nerve-wracking, and yes, it's a different culture, and yes, it was 18-hour flight from my people when Nashville was only a 3.5-hour drive from my people. But I was willing to be brave that second time because I knew what God would do. I knew what he did for me when I moved to Nashville, and I knew he'd do the same when I moved to Edinburgh. And there were still some fears. The fears were different, and some of the fears were the same. But he showed up, and I knew he would. And so I think that's what we get to keep doing. You get to keep taking deeper steps of courage as your career continues, and I do too. And anyone who will embrace that life of going, okay, God has exciting things for me that are sometimes painful.
That's right.
And sometimes loss, and sometimes hard, and sometimes really awesome and fun.
Yeah.
And we just get to be on that journey with him.
Because I think, Annie, that sometimes like the lie or the myth or the fallacy or whatever you want to call it about Christianity is that there will never be loss or fear or panic. You know, like
Or
if
that
we're
you're doing something wrong,
yeah,
if there
like,
is.
Yeah, like if we're in the middle of God's will, that those things just won't be happening to
Right.
us. And really, he does call us to take steps that are faith-filled, and sometimes there's a little bit of combo fear going on.
Right.
But I think, like what you said, we do grow, because your trip to Nashville was scarier than your next trip, which was
Right.
18 hours away. But that's what life and experience, that's the great thing about it, is we learn,
Right.
like, God had this, he's gonna have this, and he's gonna have that 5 years from now.
Right, and you just think, oh, we've done it, here it is. And then the Lord's like, I've got another one. And you're like, I'm tired, don't make me. You know?
Exactly. I know, one time I said to God, I'm like, okay, look, I'm tired of working on this character thing.
Right.
Okay, could we just stop? And he's like, no, Monica, we're gonna keep on working. It's like, okay, because he's always got like another adventure and more for us. What was your hope, Annie, when you wrote the book? What was your hope and your prayer for those of us who read it?
Yeah, so it's my third one.
Yeah.
My first two were for teen girls. So this is the first book I've gotten to write for my friends, right? For other adults,
okay.
for men and women.
Yeah.
So my real, the thing that made my heart beat the whole time I was writing, it was the hardest thing I've ever done.
Really?
It sent me back into counseling when I turned it in. I mean, like, it wore me out. It wore me out. But the whole time, the thing that kind of kept me going is I thought, if God uses this to make one person make a choice out of courage and not out of fear, then it has to be worth it. It feels hard and a little cliche to even say that, to be like, if one person's different, but when you're like in the trenches of writing and it's just you and your computer and you're like, is anyone ever even gonna see this? Is this gonna have a cover? Is this gonna be in a bookstore? You just think, if there will be people who feel the energy to go, okay, I'm not gonna be scared today. I'm not gonna listen to the fear voices today. And there are dreams in my heart that I'm gonna go after.
Yes.
You know, there are people out there who their whole lives have been dreaming of writing a book or riding a bicycle or learning to swim or being on TV. And in fact, I write about being on TV in my book because I think there are these dreams that we have as kids that we bury.
That's right.
Just like the gift, the talents in the Bible, the parable of the talents, there's these dreams that we bury instead of investing. And so my prayer is that people will dig that stuff up and be brave enough to say it out loud and be brave enough to hold on to the things that they need to hold on to and let go of the things they need to let go of.
Yeah, because the benefit of what's out there is so much greater and bigger and more valuable than the fear that makes us want to bury that talent.
Right, and who we really want to be is the brave person. In our heart of hearts, when we're laying down to go to sleep at night, we want to make the brave choice. It's just the next morning when the fear voices are screaming that we change our mind.
That's right. I want to thank you for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was great to be here.
It's good to have you. You can find out more about Annie and her book on our website. We are all out of time. We've got to go, but we say goodbye and God bless you.
Prayer changes things. If you need prayer, write to the address on the screen. Call 615-754-0039 or email prayer@ctntv.org.
If you would like to contact WHTN, you can write to the address on the screen or call us at 615-754-0039 or visit us on the web at www.ctntv.org.
Thanks for watching Bridges.